And so you're like, okay, well, the world's falling apart. People need options. People need options that are real, right? And Urbit is just a great option. And it's great in that it's general enough that it's not like here's a solution to all of your problems. It's like, here's a place that you can build solutions to your problems.
All right, everybody, what's going on? This is the Other Life podcast. I am Justin Murphy. This episode is one in a whole series all about Urbit. Urbit is a whole new computing and networking paradigm that many of you know I've become very interested in recent months, really recent years, past couple of years or so. I think Urbit is just way crazier and way cooler than most people realize. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Urbit and just don't really know about what's going on with it, what it is, and all the cool, badass people building Urbit, building things on Urbit, creating on Urbit. And so now the development of the technology is really picking up and moving faster. I decided that when the Urbit annual conference came to town in Austin this past October, that I would sit down with 10 different people all across the network, people who are building the technology, people who are creating on the network, and people just in this culture that still I think a lot of people don't know much about. So I can honestly say this was one of the most interesting experiences I ever had at any kind of conference, to be perfectly honest. I spoke with CEOs, I spoke with engineers, I spoke with e-girls from weird theory Twitter. Like, I'm not talking about Instagram chicks, I'm talking about like weird theory girls in, you know, the Other Life neck of the woods of the Twitterverse and the blogosphere. I talked with skitzed out writers and post everything podcasters, and very possibly I spoke even with an alien. I'm only half kidding. It was just wild, man. It was really, really wild. A really, really interesting set of characters you're about to meet over the next 10 episodes. And I'm just super pumped to bring this series out into the world. So real quick, before I forget, I do want to let you know, if you're interested in Urbit, it's now easier than ever to get onto the network. So I actually have a bunch of Urbit planets, aka Urbit ships, pretty much computers in the cloud, an individual computer in the cloud that can be yours. It also functions as your identity, and it's what you use to log onto the network and to use Urbit. So if you want to, I'll give you one. I have a bunch, and any listener of the show, I want to get you on Urbit. So you can just go to imperceptible.computer. I made a whole site just for this purpose. And yeah, drop your email and I will get you a planet, aka an Urbit ship. All right. Depending on whether you're listening to this now or 2 years from now, there may or may not be some kind of modest fee associated with it. Right now, I'm just giving them out for free. You don't need to have any coding or programming skills or experience whatsoever. It's very straightforward. I will give you your own planet and you'll be on the network playing around, talking to people in 5 minutes, probably. Okay. That's imperceptible.computer. I will put a link in the show notes. That's all from me. Let me get out of the way and on to the show. All right, Anthony, calling in from your sick boat cabin. How you doing, man?
My Midwestern boat. Yes, I'm doing good, man. I just defeated COVID, as you know. So I'm feeling pretty, I wouldn't say superhuman, but it's like I'm definitely feeling like I can handle all the bioweaponry thrown at me.
Well, congratulations on that. And
I appreciate that. It was like a party.
I'm glad you now have that sweet natural immunity, hopefully, for this little while. Yeah,
exactly. Hopefully that's hopefully the au natural way is sufficient. I think it is. So.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you, even if it's only remotely. We missed you at the conference, but
I
want to start by talking about the project that you're leading up right now in the Urbit ecosystem, which is called the Combine. It's basically a startup incubator or accelerator to get businesses built on Urbit. So let's just start with that. Give us a breakdown. What is the Combine? What's the idea there? And where is it at?
All right. Pitch you. So the best way, or the way I think about the best way, because it's the way I think about it, about the Combine is kind of like this 3-pronged approach. There's video so you can see me gesturing aggressively at the camera. So the 3-pronged approach, right? So you're trying to kind of like add utility, value, whatever. You're trying to add utility to people who are already on the network, right? So I'm assuming, I don't want to assume that everyone here knows everything about Urbit, right? But it's like, for right now, for I would say 95% of the utility of Urbit is Landscape, which is a sort of a client for groups and for group chat, group blogs, stuff like that. So that's kind of the long pole right now, right? So really on the user side, the idea is that the promise of Urbit is its generality, right? I mean, like it's kind of cool to have a decentralized Discord, right? But that's not the full vision. So we really have to like work on making this more general so that people can do more things on their Urbit, right? It just seems like obvious, right? And so, because that's the unique thing about Urbit being its own computer and not just like another kind of account, right? So, to really reach that potential, we needed software distribution, which just hit, and we're going to need basically organizations dedicated to building games, to building, WebRTC, chat, just everything you could possibly imagine. There's going to be a long period of just looking at like sort of utilities that exist in normal computing stacks and seeing how can we urbitize this? Like how can we use some of the interesting things about the namespace? And there's all kinds of little things we can change that would actually maybe fundamentally change things, right? So like a pseudonymous Google Docs, for example, like if that would be interesting, right? Even if like 98% of it looked exactly the same, collaborative editing.
Totally.
So that's for the user, right? And so for the user side, we're looking for like adding utility, adding generality to the people, because I mean, people already bought their Urbit IDs, but we can just imagine that being more and more useful to them, right? So your shit becomes more and more useful, which is, I think, a really cool thing. It's not what happens a lot of times. Usually it's like things become more bloated, maybe, rarely become more useful. So that's kind of for the user. And then on the sort of entrepreneur side, the organizational side, I'm hoping more kind of like not just traditional organizations, maybe DAOs, maybe some sort of pseudonymous organizations, whatever, teams that are building these products. On that side, the real goal is to make it so that those people can actually make a living working on Urbit all the time. And so this is a thing that right now a lot of people are just tourists, I mean, they have another job, whatever, but they can't spend all their time. They can't feed their families working on Urbit, right? And there's a few of us that are I think, very lucky and have had the unique experience of being able to think about this, full time. And that's, I think, that provides you a kind of freedom that is, I think, should be extended. So I'm like, a lot of this is actually for the organizations that are building these products, is to give them the freedom to be like, no, all you do all day is Urbit, right? And you think about Urbit, you live on Urbit, all your friends are on Urbit, you get your information from Urbit, you build your business on Urbit, you feed your kids, using wrapped stars or, some sort of farm share that you pay for with your stars. And so it's like, this is the dream for me, honestly, a lot of it. I just see how that, the fact that I basically live on Urbit insofar digitally, right, has just improved my life objectively, right? I don't need to kowtow to various, whims of bureaucrats. I don't, and just from a creative perspective, it allows you to just be immersed in thinking about one thing, right? Not like spending your day developing Candy Crush and then, neglecting your family to go shitpost on Urbit, right? It's like you want them to just be a balanced thing. So that's like how you make a new society, right? Is like people have to be able to live there. And so that's the second thing. So it's like utility for users, freedom, really, I just say freedom, fuck it. For the creators of the organizations that do this stuff, whatever. And then thirdly, of course, the ability for people who invest in these companies to make money. I mean, that's very important, right? So you want
Definitely.
people to be able to say, I'm a star owner, I'm a Galaxy owner, I'm a whatever, I'm just some, crypto rich weirdo. I want to contribute to this, and I want to contribute to it in a way that has, is sustainable. So I want to write checks to guys that want to build cool shit on Urbit, and I want to get a little bit of that upside. And that's a natural thing to do. And I think, in a project like this, the role of, investment, speculation, blah, blah, it's all very fraught, but in people's minds, I think. Of course, but for me, it seems like a net good, because you're like, the more value those guys have, the more they can pour back into new projects, et cetera. So it's like there's not like a disconnect in my mind between stars going up in value and the projects getting funded and then the actual work being better, right? And so I think that you kind of want all three of those things firing together. And I think that like on that last part, in terms of people investing in the network and the Combine being a vehicle through which they can invest in user space, improvements to the network. I think there's a really big opportunity there. Of course, being in at the ground floor of anything is a very big opportunity. And of course, I'm not, I'm biased. I think this is not some sort of shot in the dark. I think that I've been working on this for a long fucking time. Wait, is this a family show? I said the F word. Is that okay?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Edit it out. I think I've been working on this for a long time, and it's clear to me that this is going somewhere. You know what I mean? It's like insofar as one can make rational predictions about the future, this is not some shitcoin, right? This is not some random vaporware thing. I've seen this thing has been running for a long time, right? And so I do think that there is a massive opportunity for people who want to invest, people who want to get on the ground floor of something very exciting. Also, I think there's a big opportunity there. So it's kind of like those three things: like user value, organizational team value, and then investor value.
Okay, awesome. So that's what you're working on right now, building out the Combine, getting startups built, getting investors opportunities to invest in. Now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your backstory, and why don't you tell us how you first kind of entered into Urbit? When did Urbit very first get on your radar? And what was your perception of it in the earliest days that made you kind of think, I want to be a part of this?
Yeah. Who the hell are you is the question. Yes. So let's see, my life story, very complicated. I went to school.
It's an interesting story, though.
It's somewhat interesting. You've heard it before, but I went to school originally to play music. So I was a jazz musician. I grew up in a very nice environment where I did not realize that jazz was like a dead cultural force. You know what I mean? Like I kind of grew up in the suburbs. I was like, no, Miles Davis and John Coltrane are very relevant cultural things. Like little did I fucking know, no one cared about jazz, in a broader sense. But in any case, I grew up basically playing music, went to college to play music, bass, upright bass. And so I did that, and that was kind of my mindset, for most of my life up until probably my 20s or so. And then I, eventually you're like, smoking pot and playing bass all day is fun. But you look at the life of a musician, the actual workaday musician, especially like that kind of stuff, and you're kind of like driving around the San Fernando Valley in your, Wagoneer with your bass, trying to make like $15 to play a jingle. It is not glamorous. So I was like, aha, literature and philosophy, that's the glamour shit. So I changed, and I basically started to study language and linguistics and just sort of that whole morass of stuff. Went to graduate school to study comparative literature, actually, which means nothing, as we all know. And I basically spent a lot of my time studying hermeneutics, basically philosophy. I just basically got very into philosophy, and philosophy specifically of aesthetics and language, this sort of stuff, continental philosophy. You've got educated listeners, they know these terms, right? So basically got into philosophy. And then specifically, I was interested in the work of the Italian futurists and their impact on the arts, broadly speaking, which is of course monumental, right? Like the aesthetics that we think of as contemporary art, modern art, was basically invented by the futurists and then just sort of like shot around the world. And so I was very interested in that, and I got interested, of course, in the philosophical underpinnings of the futurist movement, which are quite at odds with, what the Clement Greenbergs of the world probably think. And so I think, so I got interested, that's kind of how I got interested in Nietzsche and Gentili and these sorts of, one might say, kind of vitalist thinkers. I think I was actually interested in Nietzsche before that because my advisor was a Germanist, so I was into all that shit, Herder awesome. and Kant, anyway, whatever, German people. And then, of course, Nietzsche being the kind of like fruition of that. And so I got interested in that. So I already kind of had this mindset where I was looking at technology in this sort of from like a vitalist perspective, which is to say, from my perspective, that means like, you know, I think a lot of discourses about technology are more, they're Hegelian, essentially, right? It's sort of like science is progressing. Technology is sort of a growth, an epiphenomenon of science. And so technology is just going along and we're supposed to kind of fucking deal with it, you know? And I think that, you know, Marxism comes out of that, but that's kind of like more of a Hegelian perspective. And so, I mean, the means of production is just technology, right? So I think I was already kind of interested in a differing perspective, which is that, like, you know, no, basically, right? That's obvious. It's just like technology. I mean, just in some ways, it's the most basic idea of technology, which is that they are tools made by people and they're defined by the values and et cetera of those people. And so the kinds of technology built by people that are titanic, world conquering, whatever, is different than the kinds of technology that are built by the kinds of people that just want to make, you know, Soylent pods and make everyone comfortable type stuff. So it's like you just have, but it's not determined. It's not over determined by the Geist or the fucking science or anything like that. It's literally an artistic project, right? All technology is kind of this ours. It's an art. It's not a science. And so, contrary to what the STEM lords would have you believe, that's not the case. And so I was already interested in technology. That was kind of my perspective, right? But I was like, okay, well, that's great, but I'm a fucking impotent graduate student who's like, you know, comparison shopping beans at the supermarket. I'm like, this was dented, so it's less money. Now, I was poor, it broke. I had no, who cared what I thought? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. What am I going to fucking write a seminar paper?
Right.
You know, it's like, and so I kind of was like, that was my mindset. I'm sort of like, fuck. Long answer to your question. I'm sorry. I'm just going.
No, it's really good. It's great.
Yeah. So I'm just there. I'm like, well, you know, just having thoughts about this is very little impact. And this is not what Nietzsche would do, basically. Would not just be like, oh, look at my thoughts. And so I was like, well, what do I know how to do? You know, I was a musician, so I was actually very, very comfortable with certain scripting languages that I'd use to make computer music, generative. I made a whole bunch of generative kind of like arty music. So okay, well, I got that. I know how to write some shitty Python. Okay. So I started there. I'm like, okay, well, what do I know about? I know about language. I know about linguistics. And so I started taking computational linguistics classes, which was just a hilarious experience because you're just there with these like computer people that have no concept of they don't even consider the idea of like the sort of like semantics as being a question. You know, they don't understand that like meaning is a complicated thing. They're like, oh, you know, it's like if website says, you know, Viagra enough times, then it must be about Viagra. It's like this is like the kinds of shit that they're doing, right? Like literally taking a string of words and chopping it up and counting how many words. It's like it was sad at the time. So I was like, well, fuck, I could write that program, you know, split a sentence on the white space and count the time it says Viagra. Fuck, I can do that. So I started getting into that kind of programming. Later became natural language processing, various other machine learning type shit, none of which is rocket science, you know. And so that's kind of like what I got into technologically. And so I was like, at some point I was like, well, I'm pretty good at this, honestly, and I'm good at bullshitting. So I'm like, well, it seems like that's what you do in the private sector, right? So I ended up getting a job, dropping out of graduate school, never completed, and people can wait for my dissertation. Maybe I'll complete it my old age. Yes, I ended up getting a job sort of working as a natural language processing programmer, doing kind of basic data mining shit, text analysis, stuff that like I just sort of was at the right place at the right time in a lot of ways. And I also, a lot of the stuff I worked on, I could bring a different perspective. I was like, okay, well, you know, I do know a thing or two about philosophy of language, enough to, you know, to point out to you that this is not as simple as you think it is, that stuff.
Okay. And then did you just like Did you just like bump into Curtis somewhere or something? Or
No,
what?
no. Okay, so you want to talk about you actually want to know about Urbit? Yeah. So I was doing that various capacities, and at the time ultimately became a manager because I can string two words together. Like most engineers at that level, like most engineers don't want to manage. So you're like sort of like actually you got caught holding the short straw, right? So they're like everyone's like he manages. Anyway, so I was sort of working in that regard, work with some very cool people, some very interesting projects. And then I basically was just perusing Hacker News one day, and you want to talk about the opposite of the vitalist approach to technology? It's like Hacker News, right? It's like Hacker News is the worst. And so I would just like read it. Why? Interesting. That's a very interesting question. Why JavaScript? Probably, but I guess the real answer is that it's just Reddit, right? I mean, it's just spiritually Reddit. It's kind of got this the implicit morality of Hacker News. I mean, there's plenty of fine shit, so whatever. It's the comments that are the worst, right? It's like the actual links. I mean, who cares? But like well, there's two things actually. Let's just put it this way. One is like that the implicit morality is just kind of this Reddit sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, just kind of like default world, just I don't even know how to describe it. It's like high school shit.
Yeah, like smug, smarmy.
Yeah. It's a combination of like zero introspection. I mean, because with all these people, everything is moral, right? Nietzsche would hate this shit. It's like everything is a fucking moral issue, right? It's like what Ruby package you use is like it's just like talking to old ladies, and then that, but then it's like if someone was like, because they are right at some level, right? Everything is an ethical issue at least. But if I was dealing with people who like had done a lot of introspection and thought about those, the morality of such a thing, then that would at least be an interesting conversation. But you're not. You're dealing with someone who just like got some sort of morality injected in their like lizard brain and is now just smugly talking about it. It's just pathetic, Anyway, the other thing is that it's like Reddit Hacker News is like there's this idea of the programmer as a service provider. This is the thing that I actually really dislike, is the idea that it's sort of like this shitty stack that everyone uses, right? Where it's like the JavaScript shit just changes like every 2 weeks. And so you need a programmer just to keep the rickety structure kind of together. And so you have these people that think about themselves as not as like, somebody built my fucking fence. He built it and then he left. He's not going to be like, oh, can I please maintain your fence? It's just a different mindset. And I think like Hacker News just has a lot of that, like just the constant churn of just spurious garbage. That's just constantly, that's what most programmers do, right? And it creates this class of person that is like this kind of service provider. That's just like it's just a constant, Good.
Yeah, one might even call it a slave morality.
One might, if one were so inclined. I'm sure there's a more PC term for that nowadays.
Well, I said it, not you.
Secondary, yes. Secondary. Yeah, GitHub changed their default. This GitHub's like the default main branch in Git is called the master. There is no slave.
Right.
It's just that's called master, and that's just it. So, and then there was like this big. This is the clown where we live. This big, committees were convened to decide what the new name, and now it's main. But it's just a hilarious thing because like every once in a while, I just still like my fingers are thought criminal. I just put the wrong thing in, and I'm sure that error goes to some central CIA.
Okay, fascinating.
Fascinating. So anyway, I found
that was
Urbit on.
That was very good. That was
basically what I.
Okay.
And
it was a good digression.
Yeah, and so basically I'm like, okay, and they all hate it, of course, or hated it. I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but they hated it, and I was like, well, if these people fucking hate it, there must be something to it. And I knew nothing at that point about Curtis, about any of this mold bug stuff, which I read much later, and I was like, this is not very impressive. From my back, I studied a lot of stuff. So I'm like, whatever. You reinvented something. I mean, it's sort of a hilarious Rube Goldberg reinvention of something, but it's like, I didn't know anything about that. I mean, I just knew that everything I just said about Hacker News is like the opposite is Urbit, right? I mean, just like even just down to like it'll be finished and we'll all be done, like Master Morzad and Wikdev Wizwright are going to finish Arvo and then they're going to go to the beach. It's like, they're not going to just fucking be there starting a consultancy to keep your website running and shit. It's just like that, I think, really appealed to me. And the idea that it's just like the idea that it was just so idiosyncratic, and it just still is so idiosyncratic, because I think that these things are arts. And like I was saying before, it's like, it's not like, I mean, I could argue with a lot of people about this, but it's sort of like, there's not a right answer. Engineering is not about right. It's about workingness, right? People forget this. Engineers who think they're scientists are some of the worst engineers in my experience. But you're sort of like, at some point, someone is making decisions based on trade-offs and et cetera. And so I was really impressed. I mean, you talk about, I want to build a new operating system from scratch. Cool. You know how many fucking Medium posts there are about how one would do such? There's a lot, But to Curtis's, whatever anyone thinks about Curtis wrote a blog post and then got something fucking running. And everything about it has little shortcuts and things he didn't solve. And this, he just, because he just like got it done. And getting a operating system to run is a non-trivial thing at any operating system, not like a good operating system, right? And so the fact that he did all this and it worked was very impressive to me. And it wasn't just a sort of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, look at my PDF, give me $10 million type thing. And so that I think was very impressive to me. So there you go.
Absolutely.
Life story.
Okay, that's great. Fascinating. And so how do you think about the bull case for Urbit now? Like when you look at the prospects for Urbit, for mass adoption and for the growth of this network to potentially overthrow the internet as we know it.
Yeah.
Well, how do you see that how do you reason through that? How do you see the bull case? I think people would be interested to hear your perspective.
Well, I think that it's very simplistic, honestly. It's that the world has moved to Urbit. The world has everything's about timing. I mean, we don't want to admit that, right? We're like, oh, I made the best plan and they executed on it. I made a fucking vision board. And it's like, no. If the timing is bad, it does not matter what you do, right? And I think this is something that I felt intuitively as soon as I saw Urbit. I was like, the world is going to need this, or at least enough of the world is going to need this, that it's going to become more of a force simply by virtue of existing. Right. So it's not like really that like moving Urbit towards the world. It's the world just having faith. And I don't even think it was like I was in some sort of whatever. You look at the world, right, in the 2016, 2015, like, of course, everything is falling apart. Everything was falling apart then. And it's like anyone who thought it was going to stop falling apart is an idiot. Right. Because that's not how things go. And so you're like, OK, well, the world's falling apart. People need options. People need options that are real. Right. And Urbit is just a great option. And it's great in that it's general enough that it's not like here's a solution to all of your problems. It's like, here's a place that you can build solutions to your problems, which I think is actually puts it in a good position, right? It's not like as simple as like, okay, Clown World 1.0 is falling apart. Here's Clown World 2.0. I suggest to you. That's not real, right? That's not natural. And so I think that all of my sort of bullishness about Urbit comes from that. This comes from just like looking at how the world is progressing and how all these structures are just falling apart and with nobody pushing them. It's like no one has to worry about this stuff. It's just wait. And that combined with the fact that it's real. And this is the thing is like people underestimate how hard it is to make a real fucking thing, not an idea, not a pitch. It's like, this is real, and it's been real for a long time, and I know enough about it to know what its constraints are. And none of its constraints are that it doesn't run, and that's the thing is like, we're dealing with a world where it's like all the other options, things that would benefit from the current, ongoing train wreck are not real, really. It's like they have weird constraints. I mean, that's not true. I mean, there's plenty that are real, right? But I mean, like, there's plenty of ideas that are just still ideas. And I think that's like, it just bespeaks people a non-engineering mentality, right? I think it's like, if you're an engineer, you're trying to get something running, and not even just, I mean, on computers, it's like getting something to work is difficult, and it's difficult in ways that you can't anticipate. That doesn't do with being like right. It's like, if anyone who's fixed a motorcycle can know that, like, you can be right. But like, it's not running. So who's the shit if you're right? Right? It's like, it's either running or it's not. Oh, it turns out I got like my fucking carburetor jet's a little weird and there's a manufacturing defect. Like, that's engineering to my mind, right? And so the fact that Urbit is real and has a real team, it has real people who are, we're into this. This is our lives. This is not some, like, I'm not trying to fucking, pump this and, escape to Singapore or some shit. Like, this is my life.
Right.
And I'm the least of these people, and so I think that to me is what makes it like me bullish, is that the time is right and we have the capacity to jam it in there and break it off. And that's the kind of thing where those are the two things you need, right? You need timing and capacity. So we got it.
Totally. I agree with all of that. I think when you talk about the world coming to Urbit, look at the salience of privacy concerns are through the roof right now. This is a very, very popular sentiment. If you look at usage of things like Signal or DuckDuckGo, like, people are voting with their behaviors. They really do value privacy, and they are moving towards what's going to give them more privacy. And also, obviously, the censorship stuff is really, really salient right now too. People do not like the idea that there are these tech overlords who can just kind of kick someone off the platform. And so I think the salience of these two things is rising very organically and dramatically. And of course, Urbit fixes both of those things in a very, very foundational way. So I definitely see what you're saying.
I think there was something that happened. I mean, this is so great. I mean, I love to see this. Like, I have these sort of like intuitions, and to see how they shake out in reality is always fun, because whatever anyone thinks about COVID, certainly the information environment is fucking garbage. It's like the worst possible thing, right? And and what's interesting is that, like, that everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, right? It's like, and that's like a quote unquote partisan thing. And so to see, the question is always like, how quickly are normal people going to see and be concerned about some of these issues, right? Because for a while, everyone's like, oh, well, it's just going to be like, wing nuts. In which case, you're like, how many wing nuts, can you fit on the network? It's like, not that many. So you need more. You need these concerns to be generalized. And so what's interesting about it in the COVID sort of information environment, just fuckery, is you just see everyone immediately sees that there's a problem here. Everyone sees that, like, weird Twitter, smoking warning, or it's just like, and you're just an average person. You're just like, dude, what is, it's like, what's happening? This is, you're just not, you're not trying to, like, fucking, trade racist memes. You're just like sitting there being like, what do I do? It's like, what am I doing? And so the fact that concern became generalized to all these people, I mean, that's just like, that's what I mean about the world coming to us. It's just like, who could have foreseen such a thing? What marketing team could have invented COVID, to give us this sort of object lesson? Not that we did that, by the way.
Totally.
We did not do that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I also agree with what you said before about just the sheer amount of time that people have been working on this. People have been working on this for so long. And when you see really cool, smart people working on something that they're passionate about, not just that they're passionate about, but that they've been putting in years and years of effort on it.
Yeah.
It really does send a totally different signal than like the next kind of flashy startup or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, it really is. I agree that that's a good point to be bullish on Urbit for as well. So you've been thinking a lot about businesses on Urbit.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you're working on the most at the moment. I would love to talk a little bit about the landscape for building businesses on Urbit. I'd like to discuss a little bit about what you see as the biggest opportunities. Like, are there particular business opportunities that you think are especially exciting and that are ripe for the taking that maybe you want to share with the audience, maybe give some people ideas? That we certainly have some engineers and potential founders, maybe former founders, people who, want to build things. So give us a sense of what are the most exciting opportunities and next steps that are ripe for the taking in terms of building businesses in the Urbit ecosystem.
Yeah. So I could talk about this for a long time. So, but part of it is I don't want to give the impression that like I know how to make money, and if you send me $5.95, I'll tell you how to. I don't have like a cache of business plans. I think a lot of that stuff is gonna. Part of the reason that we want to fund these people and we want to do it and not have them beholden to kind of like a normie VC old world way of thinking is we know that what I want to do when I start to fund a company is see how they answer that question kind of in real time, right? And so in terms of revenue is what I mean. So it's like that's part of what we're experimenting. It's like you might think you're building a Node app, but you're also building a Node app and sort of testing the market and seeing this kind of stuff. So I don't want to give you the impression that we have all this figured out. But sure. In terms of like the way I see it, and this is going to sound kind of maybe obvious, is that Urbit is very group oriented in a lot of ways, right? And you see, and there's lots of things fundamentally about the platform that make that very easy. And so, I mean, I'm not sure how much everyone knows about programming or Urbit in particular, but what's really cool about Urbit, and this has to do with the namespace, meaning like, all of our handles, is that from any program anywhere, it's trivial for me to send a message to another ship and not worry about how it gets there, et cetera, encryption, blah, blah. So it's very easy to make a networked application. That's almost the default way to make an application. And that's not how a lot of computer, programming stuff works by default. And so that's really been a huge benefit. And that's why a lot of the sort of things about Urbit are, you go on Urbit, you chat with your friends, right? Because chatting is the most obvious, group peer-to-peer thing. But there's millions of jillions of variations on that, right? So there's always been that idea of like group mode, right? And the things that one does in a group. And I think what I'd like to see is that basically right now those groups are very primitive as a data structure, right? It's sort of like we have a group of 3 and, Justin's an admin and I'm not an admin. And there's sort of this kind of basic stuff. But really what I've seen is you see groups that are quite large, maybe not even quite large, very devoted, right? So like a group that'll have like 50 people, 30 members of which are on there all fucking day, right? And the thing is, what I'd like to see and is for these groups to be given the tools to move beyond simply being a list of other ships, right? And so what that means is like internal governance tools. And this actually ties back to, I think you asked a question about Ethereum and the sort of like how Urbit actually completes what a lot of Ethereum would like to do, right? So it's like you think about.
Oh yeah, we talked about that before we started recording. Yeah. I mentioned that. Yes.
So you mind if I just slip in and
sure.
an object example
please.
Here? So when someone starts a DAO, right? And I like to point this out. Urbit is run by a DAO called the Galactic Senate that was around before this term was even a fucking thing, right? So we win. But it's sort of like when someone starts a DAO in current world, it's like they have to write a suite of smart contracts to like vote what movie to watch type shit. Like it's like they are literally reinventing the wheel with this very, actually also very potentially security hole ridden thing, right? It's like you're getting an audit on a contract to allow you and your friends to vote what kind of pizza you're gonna get. It's like, this is not how it has to be, right? But they have, right. But it's kind of cool in that they do have explored this idea of like me and a group of friends want to buy a star together, right? So how do we do this? How do we make it all atomic? Like, how do we actually just make it so that there's no administrative overhead, that kind of shit, which I think is great. The problem is that what they're doing it with is just it's like a chainsaw to a knife fight, because you don't really need everybody in the entire fucking world to know, the global state of Ethereum, everyone in the world to know what you and I voted on to get pizza. It's like, this doesn't stupid. And so, but I do think that the concept of the DAO, as people have been thinking about it, meaning, basically pseudonymous, decentralized organizations that are not, that don't have no central point of failure type thing. Urbit groups that are now just for chatting and shitposting, whatever, could very easily become that, right? Up to and including all of the guarantees that current DAO tooling gives you, right? But with much lower overhead. So you're talking about basically, you could have a DAO of, people that are just, they don't know shit about any of this stuff, but their DAO is now just like a few checkboxes in their group administration panel in Landscape, and now they have an easy way to vote. They have an easy way to tie certain actions to votes, et cetera, and so forth. And since we have that, we are, for better or for worse, we're tied into Ethereum because of our PKI. We already have, and we have all these Bitcoin integrations. It's like we're already in a position to have something where it's sort of like you can take real world crypto actions based on, let's say, votes within a DAO, within a group. So I think moving Landscape groups to something more like DAOs is a huge area that I think would be an amazing. There's just so much cool stuff to be done there, and making that just like tooling that's just like making it so people can start a credit union, people can start, an investment syndicate, people can start all this shit, and just have it be seamless for users. And you can imagine the UX of it's really interesting. Like, how do you make it simple, but like kind of infinitely extensible for someone who's really deep? Like, that's a really interesting UX question. So all that shit, group mode can just go so far. We have so much stuff we can do. And that's when you're talking about, right? Like, you and your bros have a REIT, you guys own land. It's like, we're talking about, we could just go on forever. And that's like some space and shit. And then the second one is that, like, right now, since Urbit is so group focused, I think a lot of the kind of personal, like single player usage has been a little bit like not explored. And so I think about this a lot because I'm a musician. I use a lot of music software. It's like music software is not networked. It's like, I don't want to I just want to like do my thing, right? But there's so much that one can do with the sort of personalized, the fact that your ship is yours, you can keep all this stuff in it forever, blah, blah. It's like that kind of stuff can make it so you can have creative tooling that we can't even imagine, right? Because all creative tooling that exists now is for everybody. It's not for just you. And so I think that's another place that we could do a lot of work. And I say creative tooling, people think about that like, oh, whatever, like fucking, Photoshop. But like, Photoshop's a big business, making all this stuff. Like, there's a lot of uses, and I think more so now for sort of creative software. And I said, I think that we have the opportunity to
look at Figma.
Yeah, I mean, just all that shit, and we have an opportunity to rethink a lot of that stuff. And so it's sort of like I said, the breakdown is almost simplistic. It's like, I want to do better for groups, and I want to do better for single players in mode. But those are the kind of two things that I think.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I agree. I think the tooling for DAOs is immediately ready. Basically, because if you look at like the collab land bot on Discord that does a lot of the crypto mediation on Discord, it's just a bot that basically checks for crypto holdings among the users within groups. So it allows you to basically paywall things in your Discord using this kind of automated system. It's very clunky. It's very kind of awkward and very suboptimal. But all it's really doing is providing this service to paywall things within your Discord according to how much of a certain token or an NFT that you hold in your wallet. building that on Urbit right now would probably be profitable pretty quickly, because you just like what Collab Land does is, I think they just take like a small fee on the transactions or something like that. However you want to set up the point of payment. I think that could be profitable very quickly, because right now Discord is supporting all this weight of Web3 DAOs and projects and stuff like that, but it's really not fit to purpose. It really sucks, actually, and it's obviously not philosophically aligned with the principles and the philosophies that people are so passionate about in crypto. So I think as soon as there's a tool, as soon as there's an app in the Urbit grid where you can download to your group some kind of crypto paywall for your groups, you take that business that builds that, takes a small fee on transactions or something like that. I think that could be profitable really quickly. So I hope to see that very soon.
I think, and it's also just funny to like think about stuff like that, where it's like there are so many things in this like small little, that just talk about the DAO stuff, that's just clearly duct taped together. It's just clearly all this shit that, and you're just like, look at a way, you're like, the best thing about Urbit is it's built from the ground up. So we can just integrate all these things, just get rid of all the duct tape, and it would actually be simpler, less buggy, et cetera. And so there's a lot of opportunities like that. Just like what are ways that we can basically integrate things that are currently just like this like thicket of APIs, sometimes talking to one another.
Right. Absolutely. So Anthony, you alluded before to the Galactic Senate. Urbit has this very interesting kind of governance structure. It's a hierarchy where there's a relatively small number of galaxies at the top of the hierarchy. There's 256 galaxies, and then galaxies spawn stars, stars spawn planets, and then planets can spawn moons. And so the address space that is associated with the galaxies is basically top of the pyramid, as I said. And I think a lot of people have interesting questions about this. I think it remains rather mysterious to a lot of people. And I think people have some misconceptions around it as well. Some people, you'll often hear people say that, this just reflects Curtis Yarvin's maniacal, monarcho-fascist scheme for the future of the world or something like this. But in fact, it's it's basically a Senate, right? So the 250 galaxies, when push comes to shove, they have to vote on any major changes to the architecture of the network. Maybe you could help just unpack for the audience a little bit, because I believe you yourself have a seat on the Galactic Senate. Is that right?
I do.
Maybe you could help unpack for us how you think about that hierarchy and the politics there. What are some misconceptions, or what do people need to know about that they might not know about it?
Okay, interesting. So basically, I mean, it's funny to me that people hear this. I mean, maybe this is on purpose, right? But they hear that you have a group of people that can vote, and the franchise is limited. I guess that's the problem, right? Is that not everyone, because they can fog a mirror, can vote. I think it's also funny to point out that's like basically just a republic. I mean, it's just literally just the Republican system. Right. So it's like not some random, it's actually very basic, right? In that you have 256 people that can vote, pseudonymous addresses, some of which are actually held by multiple people. So they have like a multi-sig, so there is already within some galaxies, there is a distribution of the franchise, even within them. And this body, the Senate, can vote basically on two kinds of things. The first is an actual upgrade from one version of the Constitution to another one. And so this is basically done in the case of you want to make you find a bug. I mean, obviously you're like, oh shit, this is very important. A lot of early people didn't do this, right? They didn't have some sort of upgrade mechanism. Finding a bug, changes to the address space. For example, if you're going to do some stuff that, like we're doing L2, which is going to basically make it so that it's cheaper to spawn planets, which is a point for democracy, right? It's like that. Those kinds of upgrades need to basically sometimes require upgrades to the actual Constitution itself. And so that is one form of resolution that can be voted on.
And is the Constitution, is that a smart contract, or what are you referring to exactly?
Yeah, it's a smart contract. It's actually kind of an interlocking suite of smart contracts. But really what you're doing, you're voting we used to use this address, let's use this address type thing. So not to be taken lightly, and it's like these votes hopefully don't happen very often. The other kind of resolution, I think they're actually called resolutions, which is just like we vote on a hash of a document. And so these are like non-binding type things, but they're actually very important a lot of times. For example, just a trivial example is like some of the investment that we took early on required that we hit certain milestones. And so the way that we signal that we've hit these milestones, so we have a Senate vote on a document that says we have done X, Y, and Z, we've got this audited, blah, blah, right? And so sometimes it's kind of a nice, soft way to, it's like, the Constitution upgrade is very technical. It's very hard. It's like, you don't fuck that up. And the stuff like the resolutions, which can be used in this kind of thing, good interface with the legal world, actually just the normal legal world, because you can say, basically prove that we all attest a certain statement, for example. And so those are kind of the two main things that the Senate votes on. And so, but the interesting thing is that, I'm not sure if I want to make too many examples to real world political situations or configurations, right? But generally, when you have a Republican system, the senators represent not only the formal power within like our shitty system. Sorry, America. Yeah, I'm edgy. It's like, you have just this sort of dumbass bureaucrat that has no personal power. We would hope, actually, right? I don't want, Mitch McConnell to have like a militia, really, right? You're sort of like, but that's all got its own problems, right? But it's sort of like we have a system that totally separates this sort of like, I would say, real power and nominal sort of political power. That's not a traditional Republican system, right? Generally, that's kind of why you have landholders, is because like they represent a stake in the real political economic life of the group that we're discussing, right? Where I'm not just like some parasite, beltway creature. I'm a person that has I own a state, right? And I'm like, I really want my state to do blah, blah, blah. So this is the way in which the Urbit method is like that older way, right? So the galaxies also have real power. And that real power is that they are, for the most part, they are one of the tops of the address of the routing hierarchy. So they help interstate commerce, basically, right? They basically route packets between one another. So it's like, if I'm a galaxy and you're a galaxy, I want to stay on good terms for you because I want your people to talk to my people. I will talk to your people, whatever. And that happens at the software level, right? And so we have to support the same software because we don't have to. Sorry, we should have support the same software because we don't have to. Because I, as a galaxy, basically define certain software distribution things to my little part of the hierarchy. And so my veto as a galaxy holder is I don't distribute a new software update to my little corner of the universe, which blocks you see what I'm saying? So there's like, actually, that's like the real power. And so these things together kind of define what the Senate can do. So one can imagine that a lot of the Senate's like actual votes are like relatively straightforward. They don't happen very often, but the Senate still gets together every few months because it's like, oh shit, there's some update coming up. How are we going to roll it out? Do we think it's a good thing for all the galaxies? Blah, blah. Right. And that might not be decided in a formal vote way, but it still needs a sort of like collection of peers who are represent that.
Great.
Does that make sense?
So that's a great prime. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great primer. Fills in a lot of
I thought that last part about the real distribution power is often like people don't think about that. But that's actually the bulk of what the galaxies do, is make sure that their little corner of the address hierarchy is well maintained and stuff.
Right. Got it. So what happens in a scenario where there's a really divisive disagreement among the Galactic Senate? So let's say we reach a point where there's some polarizing problem that needs to be solved, and 51% of the Galactic Senate thinks Urbit should go in one direction and 49% thinks it should go in a different direction. What happens then to the network? Is there a possibility of some kind of like hard fork where there's two Urbits? Does one half of the network get kind of shut out of what happens?
Well, it kind of depends what the disagreement, at what level it is, right?
Let's just assume for the fun of the discussion, assume it's something foundational.
Okay, let's just assume it has to do with networking, right? Because it's like sort of like organizational shit. It's like not real. I mean, it's right. It's like everything about Urbit is sort of like makes it very difficult for the Galactic Senate to be seized by some evil force, and everyone on Urbit has to comply with some social rule. So probably the worst thing would be that one part of the network changes its way it sends AIMS packets, networking packets, and the other part doesn't. And then you have just sort of like, you would have a split where one half of the network couldn't speak to the other half of the network, which would be unfortunate, of course. The real ripcord there is that everybody in the address hierarchy can escape. So it's like, if I'm like let's say I'm one of these recalcitrant senators and I'm like, fuck it, AIMS 1.0 is great. AIMS 2.0, I'm not going to speak AIMS 2.0. Sorry, all of my, denizens, you just have to suffer with my hard-headedness. Well, they don't, because basically with an Ethereum transaction, they can literally move their planet to be routed by a different senator that that they think is more sort of amenable. So that's the nice thing, right? Is that there's the exit possibility, and that really changes the dynamics quite a bit. And one can imagine that, it's like, you don't want all your people leaving if you have some sort of, it's just like, you don't want, if you're a shitty senator and everyone leaves, it's not reflect well on you, So,
right.
So
basically, if there, it does actually. So if there is a big disagreement about how things should move forward among the Galactic Senate, there could be strong differences, and one half of the Galactic Senate could choose to go in a different direction. But ultimately, the populace of Urbit, the entire citizenry, would vote with their feet, basically. And if you're in the half of the Galactic Senate, let's say you're a Galaxy owner, and your idea is being kind of evacuated, right? You have a certain position, but your people are flocking to the other half. Then you have to kind of throw up your arms and be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna accept the voting of the people, because if not, then you just all you own is an empty network, right?
Yeah, precisely. And so this is the kind of stuff where it's like, you want the franchise to be extended, I think, and you want it to happen kind of by that mechanism, sort of like where you're like, oh shit, how are people going to react to this? Like, how are they? I want to poll my people to see how they're going to feel about a certain change, for example.
Right. So it's not only is it not monarchical and not fascist, it's actually by definition Republican and quite democratic in the long run.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, great. And I think I have one final question on I have one final question on this, which I think is just interesting to think through. A lot of people look at the current political situation today on the big social media platforms. There's a lot of so-called cancellation, people getting fired for saying something that's not that bad, or people getting kicked off of platforms because they, don't toe the party line or the orthodoxy. I think it's interesting to think through how this would or would not play out in Urbit, right? Because there is this idea in the Urbit system that bad actors can be shut out, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about spammers, this is a kind of classic problem in computer science, right? If you want to have a network that's at all healthy, you need some foundational controls that are going to prevent people from spamming and just filling up the network with bullshit. And so in some way, there are mechanisms for removing bad actors, basically from relevancy and from congesting up the network.
Yeah.
Some people listening to that, though, might think, that's interesting. Couldn't that mechanism be applied to, people whose opinions don't jive with the consensus? So maybe help people think through how, as Urbit develops, could it not be the case that if there's someone in the network who everyone dislikes and the social consensus of the Urbit ecosystem just says this person's naughty, could there be a kind of convergence of everyone shutting out the pariah opinion?
So the question is like at what level the censorship would happen, right? And so you getting booted from a group because everyone hates you can happen on Urbit like it can happen anywhere else, right? That doesn't automatically boot you from all other groups. It doesn't boot you from Urbit, right?
Right.
And so that's one thing that I hope everyone uses, right? Now the bigger question of like, could your star refuse to route any packets for you? Yes, absolutely. That seems like a shitty thing to do. And one would hope that there would be a reputation system for stars that would note that, meaning like, hey guys, just so you know, this guy will, block your planet. In which case also the blocks planet can find another sponsor they can exit. So it's sort of like, you can always exit. You can always find somebody else, right? And one can imagine there would be just a sort of like galaxy of last resort type thing. But so there's just a lot of, it's sort of like one can't prevent, I don't want it to be like everyone has to listen to what this asshole's saying, right? You don't want it to be that, but you don't want this person to be basically kicked off the network as a whole, right? Because somebody did it in a different context. And so I think it's sort of like all those admin tools exist. Like I said, I hope they exist, like I run a group that's just like mostly for dads, it's like, do I want someone in there just shitting it up? No, I would ban them in a second, right?
Right.
And so
okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Does that make sense? And so I think it's sort of like,
yeah,
there's really no way for someone to kick you off the network per se.
Right. So basically, if literally everyone in the world hates what you think and do, then you're shit out of luck. No one wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
You're shit out of luck. But the cancellation problems we're seeing today with social media and kind of the larger institutional landscape today is really, it's not that.
Exactly.
It's a highly vocal minority of people who are very moralistic
and that's
leverage kind of popular sentiment to basically push out of the entire network people who, not individuals who everyone organically hates, but individuals who the small vocal minority hates, and it just pushes them out completely, even though there are relatively large numbers, or let's say non-trivial numbers of people who share those opinions. So basically, all the quote unquote canceled people in the current status quo, they're basically kind of blocked from even communicating with each other. And that's the real problem. In Urbit, there could be one big mainstream, consensus public opinion that cancels a bunch of people. But if there's even, 1,000 of them who all have that opinion and interest and set of values, nothing's going to stop them from talking with each other.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of unstoppable and censor proof.
Yeah. And I think that's
right.
That's more like what people actually fear in the sort of cancellation case is not that like the world is against them. It's that a powerful minority is against them, right? That clothes itself in this sort of ginned up public opinion, which it can muster very easily. That's what social media is for, is basically sock puppeting things into being like, oh, the people love dear leader, And so I think that's what people are concerned about. And so like that, I'd say it would be hard to do on Urbit for sure.
So just one final question on this theme, which I think is very interesting and very mysterious to people. What happens, let's say it's 2050 and there's 1 billion users on the Urbit network, and you sometimes see bad actors who are not quite spammers, but they're very, very dangerous figures, right? Who accrue a lot of power, maybe through systematic lying or systematic manipulation. Who knows what?
Yeah.
You just see bad actors gaining a lot of power fast. Maybe it's QAnon. Maybe it's the next Hitler. Maybe it's David Koresh and the Branch Davidians revivalism. Who knows, right? You can imagine so many different like crazy, intense, mass populist kind of shoot off efforts, to basically fork normal society as we know it in whatever crazed direction someone wants to, right? What happens when one of those actors owns a galaxy and they have a large number of people who they can support a kind of censor-proof, unstoppable community and set of organizations. But pretty much everyone else in the network sees them as a public threat, maybe even a threat to society, maybe even a threat to the world. Maybe that in a very late stage,
amazing group of people.
Maybe well, I mean, look, like global risks are crazy, right? So like maybe because the Branch Davidians, all they stockpiled were guns, right? But maybe in 2050, they're stockpiling DIY nuclear weapons for some kind of like suicide cult, right? Who knows, right? I'm just thinking it through. What happens if one of those projects actually has its own galaxy? I'm just curious, like how you think that through. Are there plugs to be pulled in extreme cases, or no, or how do you think that through?
Well, if there was this sort of Branch Davidian galaxy, eco-fascist, bioterrorist Branch Davidian. So, first of all, 256 of the Senate is nothing. Doesn't matter, right? So that's one thing. So, like on that level, doesn't matter. On the real level, if people were really like, we don't want anything to do with these people, it's very easy to blacklist an entire galaxy from your galaxy. Meaning, if this was like, I don't want to even make up a galaxy. Let's say Zod gets captured. I don't want to offend any of my fellow senators, but Zod gets captured by the David Koresh 2.0. It's like, I can blacklist everyone from Zod from my galaxy if I wanted to. If my people thought that was in their best interest, right? Or if the sort of like, the denizens of my galaxy. So I think that's kind of I don't worry about this scenario a lot, but that works as well. You can just blacklist an entire galaxy.
Right. I guess though, they would still have all of that address space within the galaxy to have their own little mini society. Yep. And that is, strictly speaking, kind of untouchable. That
live and let live.
Technically impossible to censor them, right? Yeah. And so you just basically have to bite the bullet that
Urbit cannot banish evil from the world. I'm sorry. It's any software project that purports to do so is lying to you.
Totally, but I like that you bite the bullet, and I think that that's just basically life. That's the world. That's society, right? Like people, yes, in society, people unfortunately can do harm to each other, and all we can really do is create a world where good is maximally enabled and maximally empowered. In general, people are maximally empowered, and hope that whatever evildoers might be out there are going to be basically outcompeted by the good doers, right? I mean, I guess you could make the argument that if it's a truly wild, crazy kind of lying, manipulating type of thing, then they're probably not going to be able to be sustainable, right? So in a kind of evolutionary game theoretic long run, they're going to exit the meme pool eventually, right? So that's
sort of a metaphysical
that's
question.
One consolation.
I certainly that's my perspective, right? It's sort of like you cannot diverge from the will of heaven for very long without it biting you in the ass type thing, and sort of like
exactly.
I even think that people who try to end these things by themselves show like kind of like a lack of faith in their cause. I do think that for the most part, I think that if something is wrong, is diverging from the Tao, and just let it fucking fall apart. There's no reason to go in there and nuke them. Why? Let them nuke themselves.
Right. So I guess I have another. This is just a very fascinating set of questions. So I'm also kind of interested in, are there vulnerabilities that the Urbit network faces vis-a-vis the current status quo powers, right? So is there, a lot of people like to kind of speculate about the vulnerabilities of crypto, for instance. If Bitcoin becomes too valuable, are the government's going to crack down on it? This is a very widespread viewpoint. A lot of people think the powers that be are just not going to let it get too powerful because it is fundamentally so disruptive. Yeah. A similar critique could apply to Urbit. People might think, if this revolutionary new internet is really going to take over, then surely the vested interests of the status quo will squash it before it's able to do so. How do you think about that possibility? Is that a live wire or is it not? And if not, then why not?
So, devil's in the details, of course, right? It's an interesting question when you're analyzing a future conflict, because you want to look at what are the actual mechanisms by which such a I don't know what you would call it, this strike would be affected, right? Meaning it's sort of like even the Bitcoin case, they're going to shut it down. Okay, how? What are we talking about? When we're talking about shutting it down, what do we mean, right? How would they shut down 51%? I mean, how would they shut down enough nodes to make a difference? How would they blow? Are we talking about like making it illegal to own Bitcoin? It's like, how would they even enforce such a thing? You see what I'm saying? It's sort of like, you got to get really deep into it. And I think about that. Bitcoin will never be eliminated by the powers that be, because, at least in the United States, because our financial system is already somewhat bought into it. And the financial system is part of who calls the shots and whether or not it's going to get shut down or not. So it's sort of like they've already committed the sin of mixing, right? It's sort of like if you had a more enlightened state that was like, we don't have any financial incentives, we just look at what's good for our people, then they'd be like, okay, they could judge Bitcoin on the objective measures of its threat to their rule, for example, right? But when you have, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, who I'm sure own a little bit of whatever, it's like, they're never going to shut it down, because why would they? This is has to do with the force that is eliminating you. Meaning, it's like sort of like what are their motives? What are the sort of limitations of what they can enforce, et cetera. So that being said, now that you understand my geo-techno-political framework, it's like for Urbit, the question would be, how would they stop an Urbit? Well, they could take down all the galaxies, right? All Urbits run on physical locations, so they could just make it so you couldn't run a galaxy in the United States. Well, there's plenty of countries in the world, right? The real, probably the if someone really was like, no Urbit is banned, right? They would try to ban it at the networking level, meaning just like all traffic that looked like Urbit, you can't send it through an ISP, which would suck. So right now, then the question is just like, how would they filter such a thing? How would they know? How would you take down Urbit without taking down the entire internet, right? It's sort of like, yes, if someone's like, I will take down the entire internet to take down Urbit, well then, I mean, we're living in a fucking crazy, that's a crazy situation, right? So we got to ask ourselves, like, how would someone be able to take down Urbit, the entire Urbit network, without taking down the entire internet, right? They could, of course, take down all of Ethereum, and then our fucking PKI wouldn't work. But it's like, what are the chances of that? Because that goes into that other question of like, how would you actually do such a thing? And so, I think the question is like, basically, how would they filter networking packets such that they couldn't get through? And that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that right now it's still, you can still do that, because those packets don't look like other packets. I don't want to get into the technicalities, but it's like, you can tell, oh, that's an Urbit packet, that's an Urbit packet, that's an Urbit packet, whatever. And so it's sort of like, but if this was going to become a real threat, then you could basically get rid of that difference. So it'd be very difficult to filter the traffic without basically turning off the internet entirely. That's my understanding of the situation.
Okay, fascinating.
Who knows? Ted and Joe might have some different things to say, but that's my understanding.
Right. And I mean, I guess they could just try to say it's illegal to use, Urbit, but then people
without
could just move
enforcement
to other countries.
Without enforcement, none of these. Our current regime seems to forget that there's the enforcement part of the thing as well, and just passing a whole bunch of fucking laws that you have no capacity to enforce just makes you look like a clown. So it's sort of like, clearly we've crossed that threshold, right? But it's sort of like that the law itself, who cares, right? It's the enforcement.
Totally. Well, this This is fascinating. We've covered a lot of ground already. I wonder, is there anything else you want to communicate to people out there, maybe engineers, potential founders, people, hackers, creators, investors, a lot of these people in my audience, how they should think about Urbit? Like, for instance, do you want to kind of make a pitch to people who are thinking about building Web3 businesses or building communities or building long-term projects on the internet? Like, how should they think about the attractions of Urbit, but also how should they weigh those against some of the downsides of building on a system that's early? Like, what types of people would you like to hear from? What types of people do you think would be a good fit to actually start building on Urbit now? And how would you think about that?
So I think that the energy that I've always liked about Urbit, that I think is really our biggest, advantage, is that this is the opportunity to build a new world, right? This is not like an opportunity to make a few bucks in the old world. And so it's sort of like, if you want to make a few bucks in the old world, well, I guess now become a epidemiologist at BuzzFeed, but it's sort of like, there's plenty of ways if you want to make money, a few bucks in the old world, but that's not how you build a new world. And so I think that to me, it almost goes without saying that there will be large financial, material upsides to being one of the builders of a new world. That seems like a big, I mean, have you ever heard this term? You know what a nomothete is?
No.
It's a good term. So nomothete is like someone who creates a way of life. Nomos in Greek is like law, but it means more than that, right? So it's like lawmaker, but it means something more fundamental than that. So it's like Solon in Athens, Lycurgus in Sparta, Pythagoras, because they made a new way of life. It wasn't just like they did some shit in the old world. They made a new world, right? Lycurgus made Sparta, right? And so the question is, like, did Lycurgus, assuming he existed, have material benefits? Fucking probably, right? But that was not the main thing. It's like you're living in a world that you made, and that's worth more than material benefits. It's sort of like, I think that there will be material benefits, but I think it's this whole venture appeals to people for whom the idea of like, you cannot be free in this world that we have, that exists around you. Do you want to be free? Well, the only way to be free is to participate in the creation of a new world. And a lot of that, there's some of that that's like, going to an island and like fucking, whatever, like Rufio and movie Pan, but it's sort of like, you could do that, but a lot of it's just like, it's more complicated than that. It's like divesting your mind from the present world, making sure that you have income from the future world, and you can feel yourself moving out of that world and into a world where you are free. And so I think that, like, we've got a lot of stuff to do, all kinds of shit to do. We every nicety about the old world, we can build, and we can build it how we want to build it. And so I think I want to hear from people for whom that's a compelling idea, because if you just want to make a few bucks, like I said, there's other ways to make bucks. You can go sit on fucking Sushi Swap all day and just click buttons. So I think it's sort of like,
dude,
but so I'm like that, and I don't want to say it's not a material thing, because like I said before, I think there is a material aspect to that, but that's downstream from that. You can be a nomothete of a new society. That's like, and what's great about Urbit is it's not one society, right? It's the ability to build all these different things. And so that's, for whom that is compelling, email me.
Dude, that's awesome. That was fire. I'm hyped up, man. That's awesome. Dude, this conversation was great. We covered so much ground. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your insights. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing about some of the intricacies when it comes to building businesses, also how the Galactic Senate works, and thinking about the next steps and who should be thinking about building on Urbit. This is awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, man.
And so I'm going to put links to your information in the show notes. If people want to reach out to Anthony, just find that in the show notes. I'll put more information about Urbit, the Combine, and how to connect with Anthony. So yeah, thanks again, Anthony. Anthony, this was awesome.
Sure. See you later.